Hi, I'm John Ruggie at Harvard University. I'm very grateful to the Dutch EU presidency for convening today's session on business and human rights. It's been just about 5 years since the unanimous endorsement by the UN Human Rights Council of the guiding principles, and we've come a long way since. The uptake of the guiding principles has been relatively swift and widespread. And it has taken business and human rights into spaces in which it was never present before. As you know, all of the BRICS endorsed the guiding principles, joined in the endorsement. Last year, China issued guidance to the overseas operations of its mining industry to follow the guiding principles throughout the life cycle of an operation. And who would have thought 5 years ago that the International Bar Association would issue authoritative guidance on the implications of the guiding principles for the legal profession? And who would have thought 5 years ago that FIFA, the governing body of football around the world, would include a statutory provision in its constitution to respect all internationally recognized human rights and to use the guiding principles as the template for how to embed the respect for human rights throughout its activities and relationships, including future World Cups. So I remain very grateful to the EU for having helped to jumpstart this process and progress. The EU was very supportive throughout the mandate and in gaining support of the Human Rights Council for the very idea of endorsement, which had never happened before. The Human Rights Council or its predecessor body, the Commission, had never before endorsed a normative text that governments had not negotiated themselves. So it was a first. In addition, the 2011 EU Commission directive on CSR was a welcome step in the right direction of deepening understanding of what corporate responsibility entails throughout the EU. The Non-Financial Reporting Initiative recently adopted, similarly, is an important step because of the role that transparency plays in enhancing accountability. So congratulations and thanks to the EU for these and many other measures that you have undertaken as a commission and as a group of member states. At the same time, the promise of the 2011 communication has not been fully realized. For example, developing guidance for individual sectors stopped at 3, has not been followed up since. National action plans have been very slow to materialize. The new CSR policy was due last year. I hope and expect not only that it remains fully aligned with the GPs, with the guiding principles, but that it also deepens the understanding of them and the spread into the SME community, for example, small and medium-sized enterprises. Going forward, the EU should make it clear that when it says that it supports the respect for human rights among companies, that the EU doesn't simply mean EU companies operating in the EU or foreign companies operating in the EU, but also EU-based companies operating overseas, where many difficult situations still exist. The EU also needs to demonstrate that it is serious when it says that it expects companies to abide by the guiding principles or the OECD guidelines. And the way to show seriousness is actually to incorporate these as policy requirements in your relationships with the business community, as a procurer of goods and services, for example, or when you otherwise support the operations of business. In relation to access to remedy, The Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe recently issued a number of very useful recommendations to member states. This is something that the EU can draw on to take further steps in operationalizing those recommendations. After all, it should be easier to do that in the EU than in the larger and more diverse Council of Europe. In short, we've come a long way, but there is still a long way to go, and we need all hands on deck, as my favorite boss, Kofi Annan, used to say. So many thanks again for your leadership in the past, and I very much hope for your continued leadership as we go forward. Thank you and have a constructive conference.